Hi, everybody. Thanks again for taking this online Bowhunter course. This is the first time we in Vermont have ever done something like this, so thanks for bearing with us. My name is Nicole Meyer. I am the Hunter Education Program Coordinator here in Vermont, and I'm going to be one of the instructors going through this course with you. Remember, if you have any questions about the course, about Hunter Ed, or anything in general, you can give us a call at 802-828-1193, or you can shoot an email over to huntereducation@vermont.gov.
Yeah, I'm Nathan LaFont. I am the Hunter Education Training Coordinator with the state of Vermont. And like she said, first time we're doing this, so hope it all goes smooth and hope you guys enjoy it.
And my name is Amanda Preston. I am the Hunter Education Technician, and I am very excited to get this course up and running. So thanks for joining. All right, so a quick overview of the course. It's broken up into 4 sections, and then you're going to take your exam. The first section is going to be the longest. We're going to go over all of the different equipment that you'll need to bow hunt. Then we'll jump into the preseason considerations, and then we'll cover how to shoot safely. We cover shooting with a crossbow as well as a compound bow. And then after that, we go into discussing the things that you should do post-shot. And then after that, we send you on your way to take the exam. The exam will be through the link in the email that you were sent. So building off of that, these are the certification requirements for Bowhunter Education with Vermont. For this online course, you guys have all pre-registered. Otherwise, you wouldn't be viewing this. So good job getting that section done. You should have completed the online Bowhunter homework. A link to this was sent in your confirmation email as well. If you haven't done that yet, you can go ahead and do that now or after you watch this video, whatever is convenient for you. Right now, you are in the middle of watching the Hunter Education staff's Bowhunter Education presentation. We hope you like it. And then we've also created some shooting tutorials. As I mentioned before, it's the crossbow and the compound bow. So make sure to check both of those out. Links should be in the email as well as on the video description. And then after that, you're going to take the final exam. This is through forms, and the link is in your email confirmation.
All right, so starting right off with the evolution of the bow, starting with the longbow, which is on the left. That was the earliest iteration of a bow. It can be simply made out of a limb and a piece of horsetail if you wanted to. They do still make them, but as far as bow hunting, it is pretty much fallen out of regular use. From there, they made the recurve, which was a little more refined. It had a little bit better ergonomic handle for you, more of an arrow rest to shoot from and get a little more better accuracy, as well as the actual curved ends, giving it the recurve name. And those curved ends just allowed the arrow to go a little bit faster and fly with a little more power. It also, on some iterations of it, you can replace both that upper and lower limb should they get worn out or just tired over time. It did start integrating some replaceable parts. From there, one of the biggest jumps in bow history would be to the compound bow. It really was the first time you got away from just the natural force of bending something back and using that natural force. It implied some mechanical aspects with the cables and the cams and all the other different parts to actually increase that force without really bending anything more back. So without pulling a whole lot of more weight, you can get a little bit more speed out of the arrow. The next big jump and the one up to current, I guess, is from the compound bow to the modern crossbow. Modern crossbow is, as I like to say, kind of a cross between a gun and a bow. On the bottom end there, it does have what you could look at as a compound bow, and then the top half you could look at it as a firearm. So essentially you pull that string back, it'll lock into place, and you can pull the trigger to release the string whenever you're ready. So we'll get into parts in a little bit, but if you use the mechanical release on your compound bow, You pull that trigger on your release, it does a similar thing when you pull the trigger on your crossbow. It lets the string fly, the string and the arrow fly. So again, longbow was the first, and crossbow is the most modern iteration.
So there are a few main parts to a longbow, which are found on pretty much all bows, right? Is the limbs, the upper limb and lower limb, the grip, and the string. From there are a lot of other accessories that we can add onto the bow, or parts that we can add onto the bow to make it easier to shoot, more accurate, including things like string silencers, sights, and all kinds of things like that. So basically, you should have seen this already in the online homework that you did, but we'll go through it pretty quickly. This on the left is the recurve bow, and you'll see the parts of a recurve bow here: the upper limb, the lower limb, the riser, the nocking point, the sight window, the bowstring, and the arrow rest. Again, lots of things that are customizable on all of these bows. Again, adding string silencers, adding different kinds of sights, adding different kinds of rests, even whisker biscuits and things like that are certainly things that you can do to customize your bow. So then we'll move on to the compound bow. You can see this compound bow actually has a quiver mounted onto it, which is a really cool feature. We have our upper cam and lower cam that, you have that drop off in the weight, right? When you draw that bow back all the way, due to the cams, right? Assuming some of that weight for you. The peep sight, the cable guard, nocking loop, bowstring, the cables. I'm not going to go through everything. You guys can read all of that, and you went through it already on the homework. And then, of course, the parts of a crossbow too. If you have a crossbow, make sure that you are really familiar with your crossbow's owner's manual, because every crossbow is different. So make sure that you are really well versed in that owner's manual, right? Some of the most important parts of a crossbow are the foot stirrup or cocking stirrup, which is right here. The limbs, of course, which are similar to the limbs on any other bow that we've seen so far today. The foregrip, which is just like the foregrip on a firearm, right? It's where if you're right-handed, your left hand's going to go and hold on to that gun, or that crossbow rather. And then the trigger, the stock, and the butt are some of the most important parts to know of that crossbow. But again, make sure that you are very much aware of all the parts of your crossbow, and any bow that you have, and make sure that you know what your equipment looks like when it's in good shape, and also what your equipment looks like when it's in disrepair, right? So if you have strings on your bow or crossbow that are frayed, or just are discolored or don't look right, you might want to go back and check on some of that equipment, and possibly replace those strings. If you've got dents in your limbs, things aren't gonna fly as well as they possibly could. So make sure that you know your equipment to the best of your ability.
Different considerations if you're looking at purchasing a bow, or even adjusting the current one that you have. And two things that are usually adjustable on modern compound bows are going to be draw weight and draw length. So draw weight is going to be how heavy the string is going to be when you pull it back, how much actual weight you're pulling back when you do that action of drawing back your bow. Draw length is going to be how far back that string will come from its resting position to when you pull it all the way back to full draw. What is that distance here? You can actually see the dotted red line between the shooter's fingers and hand to the bow itself. So draw weight. You want enough weight to successfully harvest and ethically harvest whatever animal you are going for. So, for instance, to hunt moose in Vermont with a bow, there's a minimum draw weight legally of 50 pounds. So you want a minimum of 50 pounds, let's say, for moose, but you don't want too much that you won't be able to pull it or you won't be able to maintain it for a long period of time. And I say that because sometimes a deer comes out or a moose or whatever your quarry is, and you draw back, but you have to hold it. That shot isn't quite there yet, and you have to hold that bow back for as long a period as you can in some cases. So draw weight is important. Again, you don't want it too heavy. You don't want it too light. And you don't need 70, 80 pounds to kill an animal ethically. So don't think you need to go out and get the highest poundage bow that you can find or that you can pull. You want something you can use comfortably, and that'll give you a more accurate shot. And accuracy is more important over anything else. Draw length. That's also a consideration for arrows. You don't want your arrow too short or too long. If it's too short and you go to full draw, it can actually come out of the sight and kind of create a dangerous situation there. If it's too long, it's just got some pointless extra mass to it, which could make it fly a little slower. And that is all based on the physical stature of you guys as shooters. And as you grow, it can change. So if when I had my first bow at I think it was 12, I still have that bow because it's highly adjustable, but I had to adjust it almost every year as I grew and my arms got longer. My draw length changed. So keeping an eye on that every year and keep continuously practicing with your bow can keep you up to date on those things. And also going to your local bow shop, they can take accurate measurements of what your exact draw length and your exact draw weight is, and tweak that for you as necessary. So those are really important terms to know with bow hunting.
Okay, so that kind of concludes our bow equipment portion of this, and now we're moving on to arrows. So just a quick overview of the different parts of an arrow. The shaft is the main stem of the arrow. So using this picture over here, your shaft is going to be this whole line. They can be made of lots of different materials, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. The next part of your arrow is going to be your fletching or your vanes. We'll define the differences shortly, but the main point is that they're going to be on the back end of your arrow, and they help stabilize it during flight to make sure that while your arrow flies, it's going where you want it to. Your arrow heads are going to be the tip of your arrow. They come in lots of different shapes and sizes with lots of different uses, and we'll cover those again momentarily. But those are your tips. The crest is going to be somewhat located on the shaft most commonly, and that's going to be where all of your manufacturer information is. So what Nate was just talking about, relating it to your bow draw weight, that information, what the arrow's shaft can handle for energy going through that arrow is going to be found there. So you want to make sure that you match the crest information to your bow that you're using. And then the last little bit for arrow parts is going to be your nock, and this is going to be at the very back of your arrow, and it shows you where you nock. So the nocking point on your bow is on your string, and you want to nock below the nocking point. And your nock is just a piece of your arrow that helps keep it connected to your bow while you pull it back before you fire.
So traditionally, an arrow is the projectile that we're shooting out of our bow, right? Our vertical bow. Usually we're talking about recurve, compound, and long bows when we're talking about arrows. Bolt is a really common term when we're talking about the projectile that we're shooting out of our crossbows. Traditionally, a crossbow bolt is 16 inches or less, and it's defined as the projectile that's shot out of a crossbow. With a lot of the changes in crossbow technology these days, we're seeing most commonly that crossbow bolts are somewhere in the realm of between 15 and 22 inches. So they can look a lot more like the length of an arrow that you would be using in your vertical bow. But nowadays, we're kind of using arrows and bolts interchangeably. So just something to be aware of. Bolt is a correct term, but for the projectile that comes out of a crossbow, but you can also use the word arrow for a projectile that's coming out of a crossbow.
So speaking of terms that can be used interchangeably, Amanda mentioned the fletching or vanes, or what stabilizes the end of the arrow in flight. It can give it a slight twist to it, like the rifling in a firearm barrel can do to a bullet. And it also just stabilizes, like wings on a plane, keeps it straight, relatively straight, I guess I should say, in flight, and doesn't let it veer up, down, left, right, and just off course, generally off course. So basically, fletching is going to be any material with separations in it. So a lot of people use them A, interchangeably, or B, they say fletching is feathers and veins is a synthetic material such as plastic. But the correct verbiage is fletching is anything with separations. So it could be plastic that has cuts or slits in it, and veins is a solid material. So anything that's glued in one solid piece is going to be a vein. Anything that's glued to the shaft with multiple separations is going to be considered a fletching.
Another consideration when thinking about your arrows in flight is the archer's paradox. You can get really nerdy science into this, but the gist of what that is that when you pull your string back and your arrow is nocked, the front of the shaft of your arrow is going to be leaning against your bow. And that's going to cause the direction of the bow to be slightly skewed. If you're a right-handed shooter like I am, it's going to be to the left. If you're a left-handed shooter, it's going to skew it in this direction. And when the energy is released from the bowstring into your arrow, it's going to cause the arrow to bend. And that's basically what the archer's paradox is that when your arrow is flying, it's going to do this wobbly back and forth pattern, which is going to affect where your arrow lands. You can kind of get over this paradox by knowing the stiffness of your arrow, how much it's going to bend, and that's referred to as the spine. So the spine of your arrow is just how stiff that is and how much it's going to wobble during flight.
If you haven't seen that actually happen, I would recommend looking it up, a slow motion video of an arrow being shot and flying. It's actually pretty cool if you've never seen it before. So continuing with arrows, there's multiple materials that they are made out of currently. We'll start from left to right. Wood is, again, not really used much anymore in common practice bow hunting. A lot of people out there do like the traditional style of bow hunting with either a long recurve bow. And for those, a lot of times I'm sure they would choose wood arrows. You know, they can crack, they can be less durable than these other materials. So a lot of people shy away from a wood arrow, again, unless they're trying to stay strictly traditional, which is a completely another challenge in and of itself. Fiberglass is another, getting a little more common. It is a heavy, very durable arrow. So it could be good for maybe a big blunt head in the woods, going for a small game where it might be bounced off trees and branches and that kind of thing. They're also relatively cheap to get, so some bulk practice arrows or a group shoot type setting is good for fiberglass. Also, it is, like I said, very durable, and it also floats, so it's also a good choice for bow fishing or bow fishermen out there. Aluminum and carbon are the two most popular ones for common modern day bow hunting. Aluminum is, again, very, very durable, but it can bend. And when it bends, it's going to hold that bend. So aluminum, you always need to look for when you're checking over your arrows pre-season and during the season and after any shot, really. Look for any slight bend in the arrow that would cause an arrow failure or just cause it to go off course and miss your mark. That's the main drawback with aluminum, is its tendency to bend and hold that bend. Carbon will not bend and hold that bend. If it bends a little bit, it will flex back into place. But if it does bend too much, then it can break and shatter. Essentially carbon fiber strands, so that those strands can cause damage if it was to break at a specific time. So always check your carbon arrows for any splits or checks or cracks or that kind of thing that could cause a failure when you push all that power from the bowstring into the arrow. And again, check your aluminum arrows for any slight bends to them. And if you find any of that stuff, arrows are cheap enough that just toss that arrow or put it up on the shelf or something, and get it replaced.
Okay, so moving on to arrowheads. If you look on the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see lots of different types of arrowheads. Most common, I would say, are going to be your bullet point and your field point. These are mostly used for field practice, target shooting, stuff like that. We also have blunt points right here. I would say most commonly these are used for small game. What happens is instead of making a puncture like the field point or the blunt point, it causes shock. So the main difference with the blunt point is that it kills by shock and not a puncture. Then we move on to the judo point. This funny looking one is used for target practice, shooting at stumps, trees, into soil. And these little wires are helpful in preventing that to go all the way into the soil or all the way into a stump. It makes retrieving that arrow a lot easier. And then on the bottom here, we have a fish point, as Nate mentioned, going over the different materials with fiberglass used commonly for fishing. This would be the point that you would want on that arrow. So it's a lot like a barbed hook. It's going to go into the fish and then stay there so you can reel it in. Moving over, we have our broadheads. So the main difference here is that these guys have cutting edges. They're very sharp. Legally in the state of Vermont, if you're hunting big game, you have to use a broadhead, and the legal requirements for that broadhead is that it needs to have 7/8 of an inch wide cutting edge, as well as 2 cutting edges, minimum of 2. You can have more, but it has to have at least 2. And then moving forward from that, this next picture is showing a mechanical broadhead. So you can see here how the cutting edges are kind of crumpled up. When this makes impact with the target or the game, it's going to spring open and allow those cutting edges to come out. And these are legal in the state of Vermont. You can use mechanical broadheads. And the reason that you want to hunt big game with a broadhead is because the way a broadhead kills is by cutting major veins and arteries, and it leads to a quick bleed out. So you want to make sure that your broadheads are sharpened every time before you go out into the woods. You wouldn't want to be putting a dull broadhead on your bow because that's not going to be the most ethical shot that you could take. So making sure that they're super duper sharp every time you go out so that when it does hit your game, it's going to be a nice clean cut.
There are a lot of accessories that you can buy for your bow, but probably one of the most important safety accessories that you can buy is a quiver that covers your broadheads with hard plastic. So one of the most common injuries that bow hunters suffer while they're hunting is getting cut by their own broadheads, and that can happen through a number of ways. You're just walking through the woods and a broadhead brushes against you, or you are bringing your arrows up into your tree stand and maybe you grab accidentally your arrow by the broadhead and you cut yourself. These things happen pretty regularly, actually. It's really common. So you want to get yourself a quiver that has a hard plastic that covers those broadheads. Some other accessories that you might want to purchase are better sights, especially 5-pin bow sights or other sights like that. You can get a release for your compound bow so that you're not making your fingers really sore. You can just click that release to release your arrow. Bow stabilizers are good ones too. Arm guards and finger guards also really help in reducing strain on your fingers, and the arm guards really help with reducing string slap, which can really hurt, especially your first few times firing a bow. That's kind of all I'm going to say about accessories, because you can do a ton of research on your own and really go down the rabbit hole of customizing your own bow. Another really important piece of equipment for bow hunters are tree stands. Tree stands are definitely not necessary. You can certainly ground hunt in Vermont, but a tree stand is something really great to use. Some of the major advantages of using a tree stand include you can see better when you're higher up. You're above the animal's field of vision. As you guys know, like ground animals, generally don't look up at things. They look straight ahead, and because that's where most predators are, right? There's not a ton of um, aerial predators that are going to be attacking deer, right? It's also a lot harder for animals to pick up your scent when you're in a tree stand. And you have the advantage of being able to um, have a better blood trail because of the angle that you're going to be shooting that animal at. And we'll talk about shot angles a little bit later. Of course, there are disadvantages to hunting from a tree stand, including the increased risk of injury from falling. Um, there are a lot of other disadvantages, but I think that it's important to weigh the advantages versus the disadvantages. And if you practice with that tree stand enough and you're comfortable with it, you should be able to really mitigate those disadvantages and make it a lot easier for you to use that tree stand. And I think that personally, for me, the pros of using a tree stand outweigh the cons. That might not be the same for you. You know, you might have a different feeling about heights than I do, and so you wouldn't want to use a tree stand. But that's just something to think about. There are quite a few different kinds of stands for you to choose from, including hang-on stands, which it's really easy. They hang on the tree. Climbing stands, which you actually strap onto yourself and use to climb up the tree. A ladder stand, which is a ladder stand is something you might want to use two people to set up because it can be a little bit cumbersome. And then there are freestanding tree stands. We don't see a ton of freestanding tree stands in Vermont. We just kind of don't have the habitat that supports that. We see freestanding tree stands a lot, or freestanding stands rather, a lot out west, where there's a lot fewer trees and a lot more open space. That's where you might be seeing more of those. But generally in Vermont, we're seeing a lot more hang-on stands, climbing stands, and ladder stands. Remember when selecting a tree stand to really practice with it ahead of the season, and put that tree stand up in advance of the season starting so that the wildlife in your area can get used to seeing and smelling that tree stand, right? So that it becomes just a normal fixture of their environment and it's not something that they're going to be afraid of or nervous to approach.
All right, so when you're looking for a location to put one of those tree stands, there's multiple things that need to be considered before you drag the stand out in the woods to put it up. The first thing I will say is that it's always a good idea to go out with at least one other person besides yourself when you're actually putting up the stand. So reason being is you should always be wearing a harness or a belt, and we'll get into that in just a sec. But you're up in the tree, you're working with your hands, trying to get the tree stand set. So it is a time when accidents could happen, and it's a good idea to have a second person there to help you out should a situation arise, but also just to hand you stuff and be on the ground and tell you, yep, this is a good angle, it's a good distance, it's a good height, and that kind of thing. Just another pair of eyes. So multiple reasons to have another person with you, and I'd highly recommend that. But like I said, before you go out and find the place, before you go out and to actually hang the stand, multiple things to be considered. The first is going to be land ownership. So land ownership is always something you need to consider pre-season, whether it's state land, such as our fish and wildlife management areas, which are always a great option, or privately owned land, which is the majority of land in Vermont. Pre-season is definitely the time to ask permission from a private landowner. You don't want to be knocking on the door day of and just expecting to get permission. So once you have your land ownership figured out and you're all good to go in that department, you can move on to think of what game you're actually going after and look for signs of that animal. So the majority of people putting up tree stands are going to be going after deer for the October bow season. And places to find signs of deer are certainly apple trees that time of year. Our apples are starting to drop, so they're like a prime choice. Other bottlenecks or paths or other places where deer seem to be congregating or just using commonly are certainly good places to put stands. So once you have your general general area, around that apple tree or around that bottleneck, whatever the case may be. You want to look around at terrain, cover, and wind direction, and then that kind of tells you, which side of that apple tree, say, would you want to be on, the uphill side, the downhill side, which way the wind generally blows, that kind of thing. At that point, you can actually start looking for a tree around that area. And considerations for the tree you want are large enough to hide your silhouette. You are going to be up in the air. So if a deer does look up at you, you don't want it to see, your shoulders and the silhouette of your body. You want to be backed up against a wide enough tree that they look up and they just see the continuation of the tree. And hopefully they look back down and haven't noticed you at that point. And the same thing, I like a tree, a lot of branches on it that can hide me. I like, a spruce or a balsam with that I can actually back into the tree and feel like I have, a bit of a cover wall around me. And then I just find a couple openings in the tree all around me where I could take my shot should the deer come out in any certain area. That being said, I do use a hang-on stand or a platform stand if I couldn't use that type of tree with a climber because it's all branches, and those branches are what provide that cover that I'm looking for. So if you have a climber, it needs to be straight tree with no branches, just due to the way that the climber works. So your tree stand will determine what type of tree you use. No matter what tree you have, you are looking for a straight and a live tree. You don't want anything dead. You don't want anything crooked. You don't want anything that looks, even just a little sketchy. There's plenty of trees. Move on and find a different one. And last but not least, once you're up in the tree, you find, you need to position your stand for a clear shot and make sure it's in always a safe direction. Another thing to keep in mind is if you're a left or right-handed shooter, you will be shooting in a different direction. So you need to make sure that the tree isn't directly behind your pulling arm. So if your only shot is straight ahead, then when you pull back, your arm is going to kind of back into the tree and you won't be able to get a full draw. So always, pretend you're drawing a bow when you're up in the stand. And if you need to make adjustments preseason, that's definitely the time to make them versus day of, or when you're actually trying to shoot at a deer. That's not the time to realize you made a mistake when you put your stand up. So like I mentioned, always going to use the fall arrest system as often as you can. Fall arrest system is going to include multiple components. So a full body harness, which can either be a vest type where you can't actually see the straps and the harness. It just feels like you're putting on a vest with a couple leg buckles, or a harness, which is just a typical harness with a couple, almost like seatbelt material straps around your body. They do the same thing. One is just a little more warm and a little more, a little less clumsy to put on, in my opinion. Alignment style belt, that would be used when climbing up or down the tree or putting the stand on the tree. What you can do is kind of lean back against that belt and use both hands to set up the tree stand. So that's when you'd use that, or climbing up and down the tree. Again, if you have a really branchy tree like I prefer, the belt can be a little less useful. So you always want to maintain 3 points of contact on your tree when you're climbing up or down. You never want to take both feet or both hands or even one hand and 1 foot off the tree. Always maintain 3 points of contact, and that will limit your danger when going up or down the tree. So the tree strap goes around the tree. You put that in advance, and I actually leave it in the tree throughout the season. You don't want to leave anything in the tree year round, just because the weather and the elements can start to deteriorate, whether that be the metal on the stand or the strap on the tree. You don't want to leave it year round, but a little bit won't hurt it. You want that to be as high as possible. So if you were to fall, you don't want to fall below your tree stand, because you won't be able to climb back into it and you'll be kind of stuck hanging there by your vest. Nor, if you fall, you don't want to have a big drop before that vest actually catches you. You don't want to, gain that speed and then have your harness snap you back. So you want that the tether, which is actually the part between the vest and the tree, you want that to be kind of taut or tight when you're in your sitting position right from the get-go. Some vests and harnesses have a suspension relief strap. And basically what that is if you do fall and if you're stuck in a hanging position, the circulation can be cut off to your lower limbs by those leg straps over a long period of time. But these suspension straps, what they do is you can basically put your feet into them and push off and take the strain and that pressure off of those leg straps and get the blood flowing to your legs again. Even with that said, a harness or a vest is, it's not legally necessary, But I would never personally go into the woods without that.
Something else that is legally required in Vermont is to have your tree stand or ground blind always labeled with your name and your contact information. It has to be visible for other folks to see so that if a landowner or someone comes upon the tree stand, they know who to contact about it. So just remember that that is a requirement in the state of Vermont. Make sure that you label your tree stand or ground blind with your name and your contact information.
Always use a haul line when moving equipment into your stand. A haul line can also be very, very handy when you're setting up your stand. When I am setting up my stand preseason, the first thing I actually put in the tree is the haul line. So I can get up there, get myself situated securely to the tree so I know I won't fall. And then I can haul up the stand and whatever else I'm putting in the tree. So the main use for it after the stand is up is to bring your equipment up and down, such as your bow or your firearm. You don't want to ever climb a tree or a ladder with something in your hands. Again, you want that 3 points of contact. And if you have one hand holding something, you can't have that 3 points of contact. So when you get to the tree, I use just a thin line with a small carabiner on the end. I clip my bow into it and I leave it on the ground, climb the tree. And when I get situated, when I get harnessed up and everything, then I reach over, I pull the bow up, and disconnect the carabiner, drop the line back down, and I'm good to go. Do the same reverse style when I get out of the tree. I drop the bow down first, and then climb down the tree, disconnect it, and head out of the woods. You don't ever want to haul your equipment up either loaded, whether it be a firearm or with an arrow nocked. You always want the arrow to be in a quiver, like she said, protected. And your firearm, a lot of times, just because of the weight distribution, it may come up either barrel first or stock first. And you don't exactly have a whole lot of control over the firearm at that point, not as much as you would like. So always you want to be unloaded, preferably with the action open when bringing anything up or down with your haul line.
Wow, all right, we're already at our first section break. So after this, we have just 3 more sections to cover before you can go ahead and have all the information you need to take the final exam. So while we're at this section break, you can pause right now and go get a drink of water, do what you need to do, take a break for a little while, or you can choose to just keep going through. But there are a few questions that you might want to think about, right? So now that you know all about the equipment that you might be using when you're bow hunting, think about what kind of bow do you want to use? Do you want to be using a long bow, compound bow, recurve bow, crossbow? What material do you want your arrows to be made out of? Are you going to be using a tree stand? And if you are, where are you going to put it? And what does a safe, legal, and ethical bow hunting equipment look like? So take a minute, think about those questions, and we'll resume and we'll be talking about how to prepare for your season in the preseason.
So now jumping right into preseason, all the different things you need to consider before the season starts. One of the biggest things is that you should be practicing. So when and how to practice. I would say at minimum, you want to make sure that you are practicing at least 3 months prior to the start of the season. However, it really is best if you keep up on it year round and make sure that you're frequently checking in and honing in on those skills. It really is an art, and if you don't put in the time and the practice, then you're not going to have an effective shot when the time comes. So make sure that you're keeping up on your skills, practicing frequently, and you also want to shoot and practice from various different angles, elevations, and distances. As Nate was mentioning previously when talking about setting up your tree stand, you want to make sure that you're able to maneuver around and get different angles. You might not necessarily be shooting directly in front of you, but you might have to twist to the side, left or right, and you want to make sure that you're confident in taking those shots and that you've been in that position shooting before. Same for elevations. Your tree stands might be at different levels, so make sure that you're comfortable with those. And then varying distances. You never know when that game is going to come out and how far away it's going to be. So being able to judge distances is huge. It's, I would say, a critical step in being a successful ethical bow hunter. There's lots of different ways to practice judging distances. Pacing, I would say, is one of the most basic. So a pace is just a full stride, right? It's not a single step with one foot, but it's a step with each foot. So right foot down, left foot down, and when your right foot goes down again, that's one pace. I know for me, I'm 5'6", so my pace is roughly 5 feet. So I know that a 10-yard distance is going to be about 6 strides for me. So that's going to be different for everyone, but if you can figure out your pace, it's going to be a great way for you to go out and mark different distances, and you can practice kind of instinctually learning those based off of that. Another thing you can do is called subtending. This is a little bit tricky, but it's basically using your equipment as a reference point to something that's further away. So I have a background in skeet shooting, and I used to look at the distance between the muzzle of my shotgun and the distance between that and the clay that was flying. It would look to be about 1 inch or 2 inches off of my barrel, but in reality, it was going to be about 5 feet away from me when you're looking at where that clay is flying in the landscape. And you can do the same thing with your bow. So when you're aiming at the game, you want to take into account how much it takes up of your sight picture. And if it takes up a large quantity of it, maybe like 90%, you can make that as a mental note of like, okay, that deer is going to be 10 yards out. And then if it takes up 50% of your sight, then maybe that's 35 yards out. And again, this is personal. You need to figure this out for yourself as your own reference points, but it can be really helpful to have those kind of in your bag. And then the last thing is a rangefinder technology that does it for you. So you literally just hold it up, press a couple buttons, and it tells you how far away that game is. Very helpful, but I think it's nice to be able to do it on your own before you use the rangefinder. Lastly, while practicing, it's really important to know your own skills, to know your own physical limitations. Make sure that you know that you are confident in pulling your bow back and being able to hold it there. Like Nate said before, it's not going to always be a really quick pull back and fire. So making sure you have those muscles to hold it back for however long needed. And it's really critical to know your maximum effective range. And what that means is how far you are able to shoot while making a quick, clean, ethical kill. This is going to be a combination of your equipment and your own personal physical limitations. So make sure that you have that down before you go out into the woods. So this is just a picture that talks about the different angles and how tree stands can affect the distance of your shot. So on the left here, you have a stand that's up 5 yards in a tree, and you can see that the game is 12 yards away. And using the Pythagorean theorem, you can figure out that this line is going to be 13 yards. And that's the distance of your shot. But over here on the right, let's say you double the height to 10 yards. And the distance between the tree stand and the game is the same. It's still 12 yards away. That height change is going to change your shot line. So it's now 15 and a half yards. So you don't have to do actual math to figure this out, but just getting an inclination through practice of how that the height of your tree stand and the distance of the game from that tree is going to affect the distance of your shot overall.
So before you go out into the field, you're going to want to make sure that you are prepared. Number one, always inspect your equipment before you go out. Broadheads can get dull. You want them to be razor sharp, because if they're not razor sharp, if they're dull, they're not going to deliver that effective, quick, clean kill, right? Just like Amanda was talking about just before. You want to make sure that your strings don't look frayed. You're going to want to make sure that your sights are aligned, right? You're going to want to check to make sure that your scope isn't thrown off kilter for some reason. Inspect all of your equipment. Make sure that your tree stand harness or vest that you're using doesn't look tattered or torn. And just a quick note here. I'm all about shopping at thrift stores and buying used and buying on Craigslist and stuff like that. But when we're talking safety, things like a tree stand vest, you really shouldn't buy those things secondhand. And if you have to, make sure that you do a really thorough check of that equipment. And there actually are expiration dates on most tree stand harnesses, so make sure that you check to make sure that the tree stand harness is within its quote unquote expiration date, the date before the straps become ineffective, basically. So you're also going to want to know what the laws are for the specific season that you're hunting in and for the specific states that you're hunting in, right? So in Vermont, we have our regular October bow season, then we have our regular rifle season, and we have muzzleloader season, and we have different tags and different laws associated with all of those seasons. So make sure that you're really well versed in those laws before you go out. You can always check our Law Digest, which is available both in paper copies and online. You can get paper copies of our Law Digest anywhere hunting and fishing licenses are sold, but if you're not going into stores right now, you can also get it online, like I said. Go to our website, which is vtfishandwildlife.com, and look for our hunting regulations there on our website. Another thing that you're going to want to do to prepare yourself before the season is get landowner permission. So in Vermont, we are allowed to hunt and fish on any land that isn't posted, but it's always a good idea to know the landowner and let them know that you're going to be on their property. Again, you don't have to do that, but if you are hunting on posted property, you do need to get landowner permission. But it's always a good idea to get landowner permission whether or not the land is posted. And when you do go and get permission, make sure that you're not going like the night before the season starts. Don't go all dressed in camo. Go in street clothes, look nice, introduce yourself to those people. You could wind up having a really great relationship and friendship with these folks that you meet through hunting on their property. Another thing is, I like to talk to the landowner because a lot of times they know where the wildlife is hanging out, right? So they might be able to give you a tip on where they're seeing deer or turkey or whatever it is that you're hunting for. Another thing that I like to do, I always like to offer the landowner something in return as a thank you for hunting on their property, whether that's offering them some of the meat from the animal that you kill, or if it's harvesting some wild mushrooms that you found on their property. If you do harvest wild plants, make sure that you positively identify those, especially mushrooms. But again, just a little something to thank the landowner, maybe a bouquet of flowers or something like that. We already talked about tree stand setup a little bit, but you're going to want to set up your tree stand in advance of the season and make sure that you're facing in a good direction, in sight of wildlife that you're going to be wanting to hunt, and make sure that that tree stand is in a safe tree, one that's alive and pretty straight, and that, as Nate said, he likes to be in a tree that has some branches to cover him, but not too many branches that it's difficult in order to that it's too difficult to get up into that tree.
So we've reached our second section break. I'll just add that the preseason is going to be a time-consuming portion, so don't let the short slides be a reflection of that. You definitely want to put time and thought and energy into your preseason preparation. Now would be a good time to get up, stretch, go to the bathroom, do whatever you have to do. But some thoughts to consider during this time is, what preseason preparation do you specifically need to do? What point of this long list of things have you reached? Do you know what your maximum effective range is? Have you been practicing enough to figure that out? Your consistency and accuracy. Are you up to date on all the current laws and regulations? As Nicole mentioned, they change, and they change with the season, they change with the time of day, and they get updated. So make sure that you know that. It's up to you to increase your knowledge about the laws and regulations. And then what land will you use? And how will you promote a responsible hunting image while using it? Nicole touched on this with how to ask for landowner permission, but think about how you will continue to promote that good image while using the land.
So moving into the next section, we have shooting and different types of sights and different types of aiming. So going back to what I kind of mentioned right at the beginning of more of a traditional archer or traditional bow hunter versus a modern bow hunter, a lot of the early bows, such as the long bows and the recurves, aren't going to have a specific bow sight on them. And in that case, the shooter is going to use what's called instinctive aiming. And that's just getting a feel for your bow, getting a feel for your equipment, and knowing that when you point it in this direction and when you hold it in such a way that the arrow is going to go in a general vicinity. So if you look at the picture on the bottom right, you can see that it's not a specific point where the arrow is going to hit, but a general area where the arrow is going to hit. We're going to get into vital zones and good shots in just a second, but basically anywhere in that circle. The top left might be a little close to the shoulder blade, but anywhere in that circle is going to be a relatively good shot. The picture on the left, on the bottom left, is more of a modern bow with that sight, and you can see those 3 pins for different yardages, and it's going to give you an exact location of where that arrow is going to hit. Of course, having those pins or having an exact sight doesn't always mean your arrow is going to go there. Different arrows with different different types of fletching or vanes, different types of broadheads, different weights, all those can make things or arrows fly differently. Maybe the wind, like we talked about, the elevation, all that can make arrows fly differently. So you do have to compensate for a lot of different things, and don't just expect your bow sight or your arrow to hit exactly where your bow sight is telling you. On the top picture, it is giving you kind of a picture of how yardage changes things. So on the far right of that picture, that deer is closest, and moving to the left, it gets farther away. So you can see how if you have a sight with pins or even instinctive, how you have to essentially lift the bow up to account for the drop in the arrow. So a farther distance, the arrow is going to start to lose its momentum, lose its velocity, and start falling out of the sky. And when that happens, again, you need to start with a higher point when it's shot. So if you look again at the bottom 3 pins on the left, the top one is going to be for your closest shot, the middle is for medium, and the lowest is going to be for the farthest away shot. So you would actually physically lift the bow up to align that bottom pin with the deer in this case when it gets farther away. There are many different types of sights. Some don't have pins at all. But it is still a very accurate bow sight. And I would definitely say to, look online, look at your local shop to see what they have in stock and what would work for you. There's so many different sights out there to choose from, and I don't really think there's one that's better or worse than the rest. I think it all comes down to personal preference and what you get your practice time with. So I think that's key, is just practicing with whatever you have.
All right, so now we're going to talk about vital zones. So as I mentioned before when we were discussing broadheads, the cutting edges are going to slice through major veins and arteries, which is going to lead that game to bleed out. So when you're lining up your shot, you want to make sure that you are lining it up to be the most effective shot possible, that it's going to be the quickest kill possible. So the best area to aim to do that is what we refer to as the vital zone. And it consists of 3 vitals. It's going to be your heart, liver, and lungs. So I put this picture up so that you could also see the skeleton in relation to the vital zones. As Nate mentioned before, the shoulder blade is a huge limiting factor when aiming at the vital zone. So you want to make sure that when you're taking a shot, you're thinking about the anatomy of the game and that you're placing that arrow in a place that it's going to maximize that broadhead's cutting, and it's going to lead to the quickest kill possible.
So types of shots, and by that we mean different ways that the animal would be standing when you would shoot. So the first one that we're going to talk about is facing forward, and we'll go through these relatively quick. But if you see that in the woods coming at you, you can just think about it real quick. Would that be a good shot or a bad shot? Now, my first inclination would be, especially with a bow, that would be a bad shot. I would not take that shot. I would wait for that deer to turn a different direction. The next would be quartering toward. So quartering toward you, that deer is also looks like it's alert. A lot of times bad shots are taken when a deer is alert. You know, when it's stomping its feet, when it's switching its tail. Maybe it smells you, maybe it sees you, but it's doing all those antsy movements, and you as a hunter know that it's going to go soon, and you're going to miss your opportunity. So you take whatever shot is presented, and a lot of times that's a bad shot and a poor decision, and it results in either not recovering that animal or a prolonged death for the animal. So this one, again, it is a little better than the straight on facing forward. This particular picture does also show the lungs there. The problem with this is that it is covered by a lot of bones. There is the breastbone in there, the shoulder blade, also just the front, the upper part of the front leg, and the sternum area is all in there and covering that. So even though it looks like the lungs are right there, sure, take the shot, it is covered by a lot of obstacles, and it is a very difficult shot to make ethically and accurately. So again, not a great shot, but getting a little bit better. The next and arguably the best is your broadside shot. This, is very common. If a deer is just coming across your path of view, most times this is going to be offered up to you. With a firearm or a bow, this is what you're looking for. This is cream of the crop. You can see, you can imagine where, from the previous pictures, you can imagine where the skeleton and the vital zone is. And it's basically right behind and above that front shoulder, that front leg that's facing us. It gives you a clear view of the vitals. There's not that many bones in there. There are ribs, of course, but the ribs are relatively small and fragile bones that, a good powerful bow can go right through that. It can knock it off course, but chances are it's going to continue on its path and cause, fatal damage. Coming around back, the quartering away shot. Now, at first glance, this might look like a bad shot, just as bad as the first two we did, but it's actually a little better. Broadside is the best. Quartering away would be considered the second best. So basically, quartering toward, like I mentioned, everything's covered. Quartering away, all that coverage is gone. It's on the other side of the vitals. So if you were to take this shot with a bow, you can still slip it right in behind all that leg bones and all the shoulder blade bones and all that, and you can get a good shot at the heart, liver, or lungs. It may not exit as well. It may not go through that breastplate, like I mentioned, but it will get in there and cause fatal damage of the vitals and cause a quick, clean, and ethical kill. This shot could be, like I mentioned, not exiting. It may not have as good of a blood trail to follow. Broadside, a lot of times you will have that arrow exit straight through on the other side, which will cause a lot of blood to exit that second hole, which is easy to follow. And the last one, and probably the worst one, is the facing away. This is undoubtedly the worst one. There is essentially no place you could take this shot and get an ethical kill on the animal. So I would not recommend, even with a firearm, I would not recommend this shot at any time, even on the biggest buck you've ever seen. I would consider this an unethical shot that shouldn't be taken. So again, broadside number one, quartering away number two, and as far as I'm concerned, those are the only acceptable shots.
So before you take a shot, you should always ask yourself 3 questions. Is the shot safe? Is the shot legal? And is the shot ethical? So is the shot safe? Number one, check to make sure that when you pull back that arrow and shoot, that arrow is going to have a safe backstop and a safe surrounding area. As you can see in the picture that just popped up, it's really easy to see the other hunter that's right across the way in the blaze orange, right? We talk about blaze orange or hunter orange being the safest color to wear when you're doing outdoor activities. What you can't see quite as well is the hunter just to the left, that's in full camo. Now, when we're going out deer hunting in October, we're going to be wearing a lot of camo, right? Because we don't want deer to see us. That hunter orange is actually really effective in making us visible to other hunters while still remaining relatively invisible to deer. So deer have different eyes than humans do. They have less color receptors or cones in their eyes than humans do. And for this reason, they can't pick up oranges the same way that humans do. Blues are actually a lot brighter and easier for them to see. So some folks might say, don't go hunting in blue jeans. The biggest thing is to make sure that your outline is broken up when you're in the woods. So wearing that hunter orange is really really safe. But getting back to your safe shot, right? Make sure that your surroundings are safe. There's not a building, you know, uh, beyond where you're going to shoot. There's not um, there's not another hunter. There's not another tree stand, right? Another thing to think about is the signage that's in and around the area. So you might see one of these signs, that the safety zone sign. Um, and would it be legal for you to shoot a deer that is right in front of a safety zone sign? I mean, yeah, but would it be the safest thing or the most ethical thing? Absolutely not. You shouldn't be shooting within 500 feet of that safety zone sign. So make sure you're looking for signage. Also, if you see any posted signs, if you shoot a deer that's standing right in front of a posted sign, what are the chances that that deer is going to run onto posted property? And then if you don't already have landowner permission, you could be out of luck, because even though you shoot that deer, you still have to ask that landowner for permission before you enter their property. So make sure that you're aware of the signage and markers, and you know where your projectile is going to go. Make sure that the shot is legal. Make sure that you properly ID the animal from tip to tail, right? Make sure that you're not accidentally shooting at an antlerless deer if you only have a buck tag, right? Or something like that. Make sure that you know all of the laws and regulations. We talked about that a little bit earlier. Make sure you know the season dates, the hours, and the species that you're allowed to be in the woods hunting before you take that shot. And then a really big one is making sure that the shot is ethical. If you take the shot, are you going to be able to use all of that meat? If you take a gut shot and all of that bile and stomach contents enter the meat, you're not going to be able to utilize all of that meat, right? Make sure that you're shooting within your maximum effective range, because if you don't, you could just wind up injuring that animal and then it could get away. And that's not ethical. As hunters, we want to deliver quick, clean kills, right? Make sure that your shot angle and type of shot, like we talked about just before, is ethical. And again, ethics is not the same for everyone. Even though we may have been raised in the same household with the same values, we may have a different ethical code, and so we need to make sure that we are sticking to our ethics and trying to put forward the best foot that we can, so that hunters are seen in a really positive light, and that we can continue hunting in Vermont for years and years to come, right? We want people to view hunters as good, ethical, moral people, and that's really important.
All right, so now we're going to move on to shooting stances. What you're looking at now are some examples of some pretty horrible shooting stances, but I'll just touch on a couple things. Your weight distribution is pretty important. You can see in this leftmost picture that my hips are popped pretty far forward, and that's not an effective shooting stance. In this, you can see that my belly button is facing forward. Both of my feet are facing forward, but my torso is twisted. That's pretty uncomfortable, and it's not going to give you the range of motion that you need. Nate's shots over here are pretty silly, but again, make sure that you are comfortable with your equipment and that you know how to hold it right, make sure it's not upside down, stuff like that. Those are the bare basics. So now moving on to some more common poor stances. So looking at these three pictures above, in the first one here, you can see that my arms are pretty far away from my body. So this is going to give me a poor line of sight, and consequently, it's going to be a really bad shot. So making sure that you know how to hold your bow correctly towards your body. But the opposite of that is going to be this second photo here in the middle. I've got my bow so close to my body that my left elbow is hyperextended. And not only is that affecting my line of sight, but it's also going to really sting when I let that string go. It's going to slap my forearm, and that's not fun. So wearing an arm guard is definitely beneficial, but you want to work so that you're at a stance where your body and your bow are aligned to the point where that string is not striking your arm. And then in the last picture, my left arm has been corrected. It's not too far away or too close to my bow, but my right hand is still pretty far from my face. So again, that's all leading back to the line of sight. You want to make sure that what you're seeing down the shaft of your arrow is an effective shot, and my eyes and my bow are not aligned in that. Good, proper shooting stance. You can see in this picture, this individual is very balanced. They have an athletic, wide foot stance. Their body is straight, so their weight is distributed evenly. They have a nice bend in their front arm so that that string is not going to strike the forearm, but it doesn't look forced either. It seems relaxed and comfortable. And then you're going to have the arm that's pulling back on the bowstring. You want that to be slightly angled up, and you can see that his fingers are resting right around the corner of their mouth. It doesn't have to be the corner of your mouth, but you want to make sure that you're drawing that bow back to the same point every time. And the corner of your mouth is a good marker that a lot of people use. Going back to one of those poor pictures from the very beginning where my body was facing towards the target, almost like my belly button could draw a line to the bullseye. That's not an effective shooting stance. You want to make sure that you are lining your stance up so that your feet are at an angle where your torso is twisted, pointing at the target. And that's going to allow you to have the most effective aim as well as the most effective maneuverability to swing and line up your sights and your target well. Some people do this off open-footed stance, so it's really whatever is comfortable for you, but make sure that whatever stance you choose and is effective for you, you're doing it consistently. You don't want your feet to vary between those two shots because that's going to make your shots different.
Before we move on to crossbows, actually, I just want to reiterate there are some really great shooting videos out there, including some shooting videos that we made that should be in the email that we sent to you, as well as in the video description for this video that you're watching right now. So make sure that you check out those videos on shooting as well. There's also a video on shooting your crossbow. So we're going to talk a little bit about crossbows. New for 2020, crossbows are now legal for all ages in Vermont during any time that a bow is legal for use. There are a lot of substantial changes to the deer regulations in 2020, so make sure that if you're going out for deer in 2020, you know those laws back and front. New is a 4 deer limit in 2020, one of which can be a buck. A lot of other changes, so APR is changing. Make sure you check out the Law Digest, www.vtfishandwildlife.com, and search for the Hunting Law Digest. So there are a few rules of crossbow safety that I want to cover. Number one, never, never, never dry fire a crossbow. Dry firing means firing without an arrow in the crossbow. That can do a lot of damage, not only to the crossbow, but to you. It can really hurt you if you dry fire that crossbow, because all of that power from pulling back those limbs now has nowhere to go. Usually all that power would be transferred right into that bolt or that arrow that's being thrown at a target. But in this case, that's not happening. So you could come away with limbs that split apart or strings that split apart, and they could shatter and really hurt you and break the bow in the process. Also, make sure that you always discharge your crossbow into a safe target, that a special crossbow target, or into the ground. We never unload a crossbow by uncocking it. We have to discharge it in order to unload it. Know your crossbow. Make sure you know that owner's manual back and front. Every crossbow is different. Every manufacturer is different. So make sure you know that crossbow back and front. Also remember that the rules of firearm safety also apply to crossbows. And those rules of firearm safety, in case you forgot them, number 1, know your target, what's in front of it and what's beyond it. Number 2, keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to shoot. Number 3, keep that muzzle pointed in a safe direction. Treat every crossbow as if it's loaded. And again, just make sure you check out that crossbow video. There should have been a link in that email we sent to you. There should also be a link to that crossbow shooting video in this video description.
All right, and we are at our, I believe, our last section break. We've now gone through equipment overview, preseason, how to shoot safely, and we do have after the shot left before you guys are ready for your test. So again, if you need a second, feel free to pause it here and do what you need to do. In that time, ask yourself these questions. What type of bow sight might you want to use on your bow, or do you even want to use a bow sight at all? What shot angles and shot types are best for you to get a good vital zone hit? Is your bow handling safe? Is there anything you can do to work on that and increase the safety? What can make a shot unsafe, illegal, and or unethical? And if you identify that you have been doing any of those things, how can you go about fixing that?
All right, so let's picture that you are in the woods and a massive 12-point buck has just strutted by. You used your safe shooting skills to take a shot. Now what? We recommend that you wait after taking your shot before trying to retrieve your game. And the reason for doing that is the way the broadhead kills is it goes into your game and it cuts those arteries, right? Like I've mentioned a few times before. And that's not going to be an immediate down for that game necessarily. So we recommend waiting so that you can give that game time to bleed out. And if you were to kind of jump out of your tree stand or trudge after that game as soon as you shot, you would end up pushing that game. And it's going to keep trying to run and escape from you, which is just going to prolong that game's suffering. So you want to make sure that you give that game time to go find a spot and lay down and bleed out. And that's going to ultimately make your waiting game less. When you take your shot, you want to make sure that you are really observant. A lot of adrenaline is going to be happening, but do your best to keep an eye on where your arrow hit and what that game does after the hit. We recommend waiting 30 minutes to an hour if you think that you did make an effective vital zone shot. And then you're going to want to, after waiting that minimum 30 minutes, you're going to want to go over to the spot that you saw your arrow hit, and you're going to want to inspect that area. Really what you're looking for here is color. Prior, I mentioned that the vital zones consists of your heart, your liver, and your lungs. So you can learn a lot about the effectiveness of your shot based off of what you find after waiting. So if you see some blood that's, imagine you had scraped your knee or cut yourself. We're all familiar with the color of our blood when we are freshly bleeding, and that's going to be what a heart shot looks like. That blood has been pumping, it's fresh, and if you see that kind of bright, rich red, that means that you most likely had a really effective heart shot. If you see something that is a little bit darker, some almost like older blood, that's going to be a liver shot. So the liver just happens to have darker blood, and that's a great way to tell the difference between those two vital shots. If you find blood that's a little bit lighter, almost pinkish and not red, and it's frothy, that's going to be a lung shot. For any of those shots, we recommend the 30-minute to an hour waiting period. Again, you're just giving that game time to settle down. If you come to where you hit your game and you see something that's greenish, brownish, smelly, that's going to be a gut shot. And that's not ideal, but it can still be an effective shot. You don't want to intentionally aim for a gut shot, but if you find that, what that means is that your waiting game has just extended. So you want to make sure that you're giving that game a good 6 to 8 hours before you try to find it. And that, again, is just so that that game has time to settle down, lay down, basically bleed out in peace.
So tracking, after you wait your allotted time, whatever that may be, depending on how well your shot hit, you're inevitably gonna need to blood trail that animal. Um, a deer shot with a bow can stand there and bleed out, or just lay down right where it is. It's not common. Most of the time, they'll, once you shoot, they'll of course feel that and maybe feel threatened and run away from you. A lot of times, they'll run the way they came. So the first step in successful blood trailing is watching where the animal goes. So directly after your shot, your heart might be pumping, your adrenaline might be going, you might be focused on getting another arrow in and trying for another shot if that's a possibility. But what you really need to be doing is watching exactly where A, that arrow hits, and B, where that deer goes. So you need to see right between, pick a marker. So if you see 100 yards away or 50 yards away that the deer left your sight, mark that tree in your mind that the deer ran by, so you can get to that tree, because that's where the blood trail is going to start, right? You're going to look for blood at the site of the shot, and then you know that they ran between there and that tree that you marked. That's the beginning of your blood trail. So once you get your first blood, it's always a good idea to mark it. So me personally, I carry a small little roll of Flaggers tape in my hunting pack, and that's specifically for blood trailing. So when I find blood, I'll mark the tree, just with 2-3 inches of it, a little tail, enough that I can find it, and I'll start looking for the next one. I'll look in the direction that the deer would have ran naturally. It's not often that a running deer will make an immediate turn left or right unless there's something blocking their path. So I'll first check straight ahead of me for where I think the deer would have gone. If I don't find blood, I'll come back to my last blood, the point that I've marked with my Flaggers tape, and I'll either work in a spiral or a grid pattern to look for that blood. And most of the time that works, and you can find it. You can mark your next blood and move on and continue that way until hopefully you find that deer. Now, if you don't find blood, you have to look for other signs, right? So, of course, if you happen to be on snow, that's very easy. You can just follow the tracks, and blood shows up really, really well on snow. But most of the time in bow season, we don't have snow, and that's actually why a lot of people like bow season, is it's a little warmer. But you can look for broken branches. You can look for grass bent over. You can look for tracks in the mud, overturned leaves. A lot of different ways to track an animal besides blood, right? But a lot of times looking for those other, those secondary clues can help you find the next bit of blood. And maybe it hasn't died yet for some reason, and you actually jump it again. At that point, essentially you're back to square one. So you need to back off and don't let it jump up again, because you know what area it's in, and a shot deer is not going to go more than 50, 100 yards. But if you keep jumping it, you don't know where it is at that point, right? And you're continually tracking it. So looking for clues, keeping your head down, going slow. It's not a race. You don't need to chase the deer down and immediately find it. If you look for upwards of 2 or 3 hours, as long as you find that animal and that deer, that's the goal of the mission here. And that's why we're out here, is to successfully end this hunt. And that includes finding the deer and getting it home. So, take your time, do what you got to do to find it. If you need to give it time to sit and rest, go back to camp, call a few buddies, get a little search party team out there to look for it. And hopefully you'll end up in success and finding that. If all else fails and you've the trail's gone cold, you can't find any blood, you can't find any tracks, no broken branches, that kind of thing, there's a couple last ditch efforts you can do. The first would be that the Fish and Wildlife Department keeps an updated list yearly of licensed dog trackers, so blood trailers, but with dogs. So they are certainly someone you can try calling. A lot of times in the middle of the season, they are busy, but it's certainly worth a try to get them out there and see if they can find your deer. A lot of times they can, track the deer by scent, by blood scent, where you can't even see the little speck of blood that's there on the ground. Especially that time of year, the leaves are starting to fall, and those blood red colored leaves really start to mess you up when you're looking for little blood dots. You think you found one, and it just turns out to be a really bright leaf, and that's extremely common. The other last ditch efforts you can do is a wounded deer always tends to run either downhill or towards water. I've heard both ways, and conveniently they're the same. Water is going to be downhill. So I like to think of it as if you give yourself a paper cut, or say you cut yourself while cooking, you're going to run it under cold water, right? It feels good naturally to do that. And a deer is going to be the same way. So a lot of times if you need to come back the next day, there's a good chance it might have died if you did make a solid hit. So people have been known to walk the nearby brooks and streams looking for a deer that might have gone into that cool water for some relief, and actually found them there the next day, and was able to salvage the deer. So also the path of least resistance, right? A deer isn't going to want to go into a super thick thicket if they're trying to run fast. They're going to want to take the path of least resistance. So sometimes you can just stand there from your last blood and look up, which is kind of counterproductive when you're blood trailing. You're always looking down for blood. But if you look up and look for the path of least resistance, sometimes there's a clear path right through the woods, and you could say, I'll bet the deer probably ran straight through there, and you can go ahead and look for more blood. But basically, the most important thing is don't stop looking. Certainly don't get yourself into a survival situation where you're out there too long. But you've done the work, you've done the preparation, you've scouted, you've asked permission, you've put up the stand, everything else we've talked about, you've made your shot, and you have a deer out there somewhere just waiting for you. So don't give up and just go back and sit in your tree. There'll be another deer that comes along. You owe it to that deer to go find it and put it on the dinner table. So do what you can to get out there and find that deer.
Hey Nate, if I shot a deer and I was tracking it and I noticed that the blood trail went onto posted land, what would I want to do then?
So great question. If it was land that you didn't have permission for, then you would need to prior to entering need to find the landowner. And in most cases, the landowner's name and a lot of times phone number is going to be written on the posted sign, so you could even give them a call, or find the residence. I would suggest trying the calling method first with the social distancing at this point. And if they say no, or if something else arises, you can try the game warden as well, and go from there. But you do need legal permission to be on that posted land, whether you're hunting or not, and that includes recovery of wounded animals. So you do need landowner permission prior to entering that land.
So you've taken the shot. You've waited 30 minutes to an hour if you thought it was a good shot, or if it was a gut shot, maybe you waited a little bit longer, 6 to 8 hours, something like that. What do you do now? First thing you do, you obviously, like Nate was talking about, you blood trail that animal and you find it. Great, you find it. First thing you have to do, make sure that animal is dead. There are many instances where a hunter will come upon a deer or turkey or other animal that's lying on the ground that they think is dead, but it's actually still in the process of dying. It's really tired out, worn out. But if you approach it, it could get a final burst of adrenaline. And if it's a deer, it could really hurt you with those antlers. If it's a turkey, it could scrape you with those spurs, right? So first thing you got to do is make sure the animal is actually dead. What a lot of people do is they will poke it with a stick from a safe distance. If you are hunting with your rifle, I know this is a bow class. If you're hunting with your rifle, you might just poke it with the muzzle. Maybe you can poke it with the end of one of your extra arrows that you have in your quiver. So first thing you do, make sure that animal is dead. Second thing you need to do, really important, make sure that you tag that animal. So when you purchase your hunting license, you get printed out paper tags. You can use those tags, although in my experience, those tags really don't stand up to the outdoors, right? Inevitably, when you're outside, you get exposed to the elements. What you can do is a few things. You can cut out those tags and you can seal them up in a Ziploc bag, or you can put packing tape around those tags so that they don't get all tattered and wet and torn up. Or you can use some of the orange plastic transportation tags that we have at our regional offices. You can request them through our licensing office. A lot of times you can get them at licensing agents anywhere that sells hunting and fishing licenses. They're these great plasticky, orange, really durable tags, and you can use those as a transportation tag to tag your game. If you do not tag your game, you can't move it anywhere, right? That tag makes you legal to possess that animal. After you tag that animal, the next thing you've got to do is field dress it. Now, we don't have time to go into field dressing in this video, but there are tons of resources out there on field dressing. I would really encourage you to go on to YouTube and look at a ton of YouTube videos on how to field dress a deer. And then if you know someone that is really comfortable with field dressing, go with them and help them field dress their deer if you don't know how to already do that. Some of our reporting stations last season were reporting that a lot of folks were not properly field dressing their animals when they brought them in, leaving organs in the deer, and we can't do that. We've got to really field dress that deer and do a really good job of making sure that all the innards are taken out. After you have successfully field dressed that deer, drag it out of the woods. And there are a bunch of ways that you can do that. You can do it the old-fashioned way with just dragging it using your own muscle. Call a friend, get an ATV. Horses sometimes can help you drag out that deer too, right? Next thing to do is package up and process that meat. Again, there are tons of really great YouTube videos out there for how to package meat. I think this fall we are going to do more cooking seminars, so you can also go to our website, vtfishandwildlife.com, and search for Fish and Wildlife Seminars to check out some of our seminars where we'll be teaching you how to properly field dress and also cut up and butcher your animals. And then cook and enjoy, right? Um, that's really important. One of my top motivations for hunting is because I love to eat wild food. I love to eat food that I know lived a wild and healthy, beautiful life, and I love eating that meat. What I don't want is spoiled meat. And the top three biggest enemies to fresh meat is number one, moisture. You don't want that meat to get wet. Number two, dirt. You don't want any dirt, dead leaves, sticks, brush, whatever being on your meat for a very long time. You want to make sure that there's as little contamination as possible. And number three, heat. Right? If there's heat, it's like we're slowly cooking that meat, and the warmer the meat gets, the more bacteria can be growing on that meat. So we want to make sure that we're field dressing and dragging out that meat out of the woods as quickly as possible to make sure that there's little exposure to moisture, dirt, and heat.
Can I just add a little something real quick as well? In dragging out of your deer, specifically in bow season, a little pro tip that I actually just learned this past season myself is you're still in your harness, your fall arrest system. So you're in your full harness and you have that big long tether to attach you to your tree. A good thing you can do is carry a little bit of rope with you and tie it around the base of the antlers, making like a cross piece between both antlers if it's a buck, or around the neck if it's a doe. And essentially attaching it to the end of that tether, and then you have a full harness, a full drag harness to pull that deer out with. So you can be square and pull it away rather than trying to drag it with your hands and arms at an awkward angle. And that actually does make it a lot easier. So I'd recommend giving that a try.
We're at our final section break. Thank you so much for bearing with us. Our first time that we're doing anything like this here in Vermont, making our own homegrown virtual bow hunter course, right? I hope that you learned a little something. And now that we're at the end, right before you take your exam, here's a few questions to think about. How will your excitement hinder your ability to watch your game's behavior right after you take the shot? So when you're pumped up with adrenaline, I know that after I take the shot, I'm so excited, so pumped up with adrenaline. I like look all around me, and even when I'm by myself, I look like next to me to like try to high five somebody that I know is not even there. I don't know what I'm trying to do, but it takes my attention away from that animal, and we certainly do not want to do that, right? So make sure that even after you take that shot, you're still focused on that animal. Do you have all the gear you need to field dress your game successfully? You need really sharp knives, right? That's one thing that you need um, in order to field dress those animals, right? What else do you need in order to field dress that animal? Does the time of day affect your shot choice and tracking ability? What about if it's cloudy or if it's raining? And how will you package up and prepare the animal that you shoot? There are tons of recipes again on YouTube. You can check out Rooted in Vermont, which is a partner of ours they share lots of recipes. We have a bunch of YouTube videos, Vermont Wild Kitchen. You can check those out for how to prepare wild game and wild fish and wild forage plants too. So wrapping up, thank you so much for taking this course. We hope that you learned a little something. We had a lot of fun putting this together. Remember that there are a lot of new regulations this year, especially with deer. Make sure that you know those laws like the back of your hand. And if you don't, make sure to pick up a law digest from our office. You can call us and have us mail one to you, or you can access it online at www.vtfishandwildlife.com. Remember that we've extended the archery season. All bow hunters can now use a crossbow to hunt during bow seasons. And we've expanded the limits on deer. There's now a 4 deer limit per year, and one of those deer can be an antlered buck. Remember, the zone that you're hunting in might have an antler point restriction. It might not. So make sure that you check out that map on our website. And we're going to link to all of those deer regulations as well in this video. Okay, so make sure that you know all of the new laws, pick up a law digest. If there is something that we didn't cover in this video and you have questions about, please give us a call or shoot us an email. You can contact the Vermont Hunter Education Program at 802-828-1193, or you can send us an email at huntereducation@vermont.gov. That's Huntereducation@vermont.gov. And now remember, your last step is to take that final exam. The link to that final exam is in your email. If you can't find that email, if you didn't get that link emailed to you, please contact us. Don't use a friend's link. Okay, you have to use your own test. If you don't use your own test, things get sloppy, and we won't know that you actually took the exam. Everyone has their own unique exam that they're taking that's flagged in our system. So make sure that you take that test. Once you complete that test online, uh, we will send you a confirmation email that you're certified and ready to go, and then we'll mail your yellow card to you, your bow hunter certification card. And remember, that card is good to bow hunt for all 50 states. So that means you can go bow hunting in Wisconsin, in New Mexico, in Nevada, anywhere in the US. You can go bow hunting with that Vermont bow hunter card. So make sure that you don't lose it. Thanks a lot. Amanda, Nate, do you guys have anything you want to add?
Thanks for attending. Hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, same for me. Thank you so much for watching us, and hunt smart, hunt safe, wear orange, and good luck.